Welcome back, everybody. We have been mentioning the word SAE or the letters SAE for the last couple of weeks, but we haven't actually had much of a chance to talk about what an SAE is. And as we go through the next few slides, I'm going to be giving you some examples. The thing about SAE is that it really is tailored to the things that you're interested in, the things that you're good at, the things that you have resources for. Now, if you say, well, I don't live on a farm, that's okay. You don't have to live on a farm in order to do an SAE. There are lots of different options out there. You just have to figure out which option you want to take part in. Um, the thing about SAE is that it is very unique and individual to each student. So, as we go through the next few slides, we'll talk about some examples and hopefully help you to figure out what it is that you want to do. And then within the next couple of weeks, we'll start getting an SAE plan together. So, an SAE is basically a project where you're going to be gaining work experience in some sort of field of agriculture. Now, typically it's done outside of school hours, but that's not always the case. We have incorporated a lot of SAE opportunities into our classes for those students who are actually on campus. So, those of you who are going to the barn to help milk goats, and those of you who are working with our hydroponic system, will be using those hours and those activities that you're doing at the barn as part of your SAE. So it's typically done outside of class time, but we kind of, because we know that not everybody has the resources at home to be able to do it, then we try and incorporate some class time in there as well. So it can be any area of agriculture, plants, animals, businesses. You can also do a science experiment, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few slides. There are different types of SAEs. The first type of SAE that was ever created was entrepreneurship. Now, when you hear the word entrepreneurship, you think it's some businessy term, and it is. I mean, the essence of an entrepreneurship is actually having your own business, and so. You may not have a storefront or your own website, but it's having something that is yours, that belongs to you, that you're taking financial responsibility for, and you are taking responsibility for taking care of and feeding and things like that. So if you own a cow, or if you own some goats, or if you raise plants and sell them, or if you raise vegetables and sell them, then those are entrepreneurship projects. You can see the examples in here: raising plants to sell, operating a trout farm, owning a farm supply store. All of these are examples of something where you own a business or are running a business. I had a student one time that decided they wanted to do a landscaping business, and so they borrowed some equipment and they started cutting grass for people and kind of developed their own landscaping business. So, entrepreneurship is more or less where you are starting something from scratch that's yours, and you are working for or performing a service, or providing some sort of a product uh, for the public. Um, if you were keeping records on this, the records you would keep would be the type of enterprise, the items that you've bought or sold, expenses. Every business is going to have some sort of expenses. That student that had the landscaping business, they had to pay for gas and they had to pay for equipment and upkeep. Income: what do you make? What kind of money are you making? You keep up with that income, and how efficient are you? Now, this might have something to do with, like, if you have an animal and you are giving them feed, how much weight are they gaining? So, efficiency factors may or may not always be part of your record keeping process, but it is one that you would see with an entrepreneurship from time to time. Maybe you're a science type student and maybe you prefer to do science experiments. An experimental type of SAE is basically a science experiment. If you ever had to complete a science experiment in elementary school or middle school, you've got the whole backboard with the purpose and the hypothesis and then the methods and the results and conclusion. That's exactly what you would be doing for an experimental type of SAE, is actually doing that science experiment. One example could be that you're looking at different fertilizer rates on tree seedlings. That's the one that's here in the slide. We did have a student last year, Amir Mafta. He actually did a project where he grew squash in our greenhouse, and he used different types of rabbit feces as his um, fertilizer, and he looked at the different feeds and what he was feeding them and what kind of waste they were producing and how it actually had an effect on the squash plants that he was growing. And he entered that into our state and national agri-science fair. So that is an option if that's something that you're interested in doing. Any type of project, anything from plants to animals, ag engineering, environmental science. There's a lot of different areas out there. There's even a social science area where you can survey people. And so when you're looking at a science-based type of SAE, this is one that anybody can do, and you don't have to have a farm or any type of farm equipment. This is something that any student can do, regardless of the resources that you have. Analytical is very similar to experimental. It's just where you're doing a research project. Maybe you want to learn more about a particular topic, but there's not a way to do an experiment to actually do the scientific method. So maybe instead you just do some research on some sort of an agricultural topic and you come up with a plan to investigate and analyze the problem. This is another one of those that any student can do. You don't have to be on campus. You don't have to have animals. You don't have to have plants. You don't have to have any type of resources other than where you're actually researching, internet, interviews, talking to different people. So analytical is analyzing a situation and coming up with some sort of a project based on what you analyzed. Making a market and display is the example that's on here, but maybe you're concerned about I don't know, recently with this COVID situation, there was a bacteria outbreak in Broad River. Maybe you wanted to look at what people are saying about that and different bacterias in rivers. And maybe you wanted to come up with a series of articles about that. So anything that you're doing that is more or less a research project would be an analytical type of SAE. Again, another type of option that you can do without having to have a lot of resources. So the very first type of SAE that was ever created was an entrepreneurship project, and that was where people actually had stuff on their own. But eventually it kind of got to a point where people said, well, I don't necessarily have resources. So since I don't have resources, what can I do? Well, that was when they came up with the second type of SAE that was ever created, and that is placement. And placement is where you're working for somebody. You're working at a job outside of regular classroom hours. It can be paid work, it can be unpaid or volunteer work, and basically you're working for somebody. We've had students who have worked for Cleveland Feed before. We have students who have worked for Tractor Supply. You have to be 18 to work at Tractor Supply. We've had students who've worked for Homestead. We've had students who've worked for local veterinarians, and all of these are people who are doing placement types of SAEs because they're actually doing a job. They don't own the business, but they're in there doing the job for somebody that does own the business. So you can see the different records that are going to be required whenever you have a placement type of SAE. You're going to have a training agreement that's signed by the student, the teacher, the parent, the employer, and just a record of what you're doing, how long you're working, and what type of money that you're making. An exploratory type of SAE is going to be one that's for your kind of your first year students, some of those students who are a little bit less involved or experienced with agriculture classes. Exploratory is typically going to be students who are just beginning to learn about agriculture and learn about what it actually entails and what they may want to do with agriculture one day, and looking at different careers. You may job shadow somebody. You might do a scrapbook about some sort of a job or career. You might interview somebody who's in a particular area. You may assist somebody for a day. And really, this one's pretty easy to keep records for. You're just doing some observations and hours and what you actually did that particular day. So, fairly easy way to get started in SAE is the exploratory type of SAE. Improvement's probably one of my favorites. I kind of like the whole idea of doing DIY type projects. Um, One of my favorite things to do in my Horticulture 2 class is to do the landscape design project along with the students, where we're trying to figure out how I want to do a landscape, because I enjoy coming up with ways to make things look better or function better. So that's exactly what an improvement project is. You are doing a series of activities. That's not something that you can do in just one afternoon, but it's a series of activities that's going to make something look better or work better or improve the efficiency of something or improve the living conditions of somebody or something. But it's going to take you more than one afternoon to do it. Um, Putting in a fence. I mean, if you are putting in a pasture fence, that's going to take some time. You're going to have to get the materials and do the planning and then actually doing all the work. So that's a great example of an improvement. We had a student one time who, for a hobby, he restored antique tractors. And so that's something that's going to take more than a day or two to do, because he had to find parts and equipment, and he had sandblast and paint. And so an improvement project is going to be something that's going to take you some time, but it's going to make something look or function better than it did before you started. Now, one thing you can do is you can do lots of little mini projects, and a lot of times these little mini projects, we call them supplementary. These are in addition to your major type of SAE. It's just something that you do that is agriculture related, that you are doing maybe in an afternoon. Something that doesn't take you very long. Maybe it's something that doesn't take you but a couple of steps to accomplish. Um, You've got pruning a tree as an example, staking tomatoes as an example, and changing oil. One thing that we do a lot of times is we go down to the barn and we trim goat hooves, and that's something that we can do in an afternoon. We got home yesterday and we had a goat that needed to be dewormed, and that's something that's a supplemental activity that was fairly quick to do, but it was something that needed to be done. So supplemental activities may or may not have to do with your major type of SAE, but they are going to supplement your SAE project, and do small activities that are going to make those projects better. There's a lot of reasons why we do this, and I know that for some people the hardest thing is coming up with why they want to do an SAE and what they want to do for an SAE. But it really does help students who are looking to go into the field of agriculture. Um, I always tell this story. We had a student who, as a freshman, she came in and she wasn't really sure what she wanted to do with her life. She was having some turmoil outside of school. Her parents were in the middle of a divorce, and so she was kind of one of those students that really didn't know what she was planning on getting into. She started her SAE by doing an exploratory SAE with Boiling Springs Florist, and she just went and she would observe and go help out because her mom was friends with the owner. And so she continued doing that project, and as she uh, went throughout high school, she became much more interested in floriculture and the horticulture side of things. And by the time she was a junior, she got her license and she was doing deliveries for the florist. And by the time she was a senior, she was working there in the afternoons and on weekends. And um, her senior year, the last semester of her senior year, I actually had her for 3 class periods a day, and then she left and went to a job. Um, these days, because she started with that ninth grade job at a florist, she is now the department head at Alamance Community College for horticulture. She has her doctorate degree in horticulture, and we're really proud of the things that she's done. But her SAE was what launched something that she loved doing and became her career. So there's a lot of reasons to do an SAE, and we've had students who have gotten jobs and chosen careers. We've had students who have won FFA awards. We have some students who've just won some state proficiency awards and went on to national competition. There's so many things that SAE can do for you if you take it seriously and if you put the time and the effort into to doing a quality project. And I will help you to figure out what it is that you want to do. You can discuss with me, email me, but ultimately it has to be your decision what you decide you want to do for your project. And that is the end of SAE. As we go through the next couple of weeks, we will actually be inputting some things into the AET, and those things that we'll be putting in there are some plans for your SAE, and we'll help you to figure out what it is you want to do. This will be an entire semester project, so don't panic if it takes you a little while to figure out what it is you want to do. We're going to be working with this over the next couple of weeks. Um, Thanks. I will see you soon, and we will begin talking about animal breeds in the next unit.